So, welcome to the Rick Bisson Podcast, episode 20, and we're super excited to have with us today Tamara, Lilly. And you are known to me and many others through your work as a voiceover artist, a speaker. You do some one-on-one coaching for speaking. You're a podcaster. And in your spare time, I think I have this right, you're a business support specialist for Burgess Technology Services.
Correct.
Or BTS.
Yes.
So, plenty of spare time. I don't think I mentioned actress, excuse me.
Yep.
Yeah. And very active in the community.
Yes.
So hobbies include photography, theater, board gaming, camping, and cosplay. What is cosplay?
It's cosplay.
Cosplay,
probably.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm like, oh my goodness, yes. It's dressing up. It's dressing up in costume. So mostly we do it for Halloween related, but a lot of people do it. They dress as their favorite characters from things. So there's cons around, like Comic-Con, so comic convention, that kind of thing. We've only gone to one of those, but some of what we do could be interpreted as cosplay because it's from movies or television or that kind of thing.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And your costumes are outstanding.
They're kind of fun. But
yes.
But who do we have to thank for a lot of that?
So, yes, I was going to talk about that at some point in time. That
like, you don't know he's a voiceover artist. First.
And my brother Joe are life partners. Yes.
Correct.
Yes. And he is a... how do I say this? A costume enthusiast, and creator of things. He will spend more time on little elements of a costume that will add details than most people would spend on other things.
Right. Yeah. He's a fabricator.
Yes, a fabricator.
And so what's interesting is he's also a techie. So sometimes the fabrication now is 3D printing.
Yes.
But sometimes it's metalwork, or, find him melting metal and putting it in this form he created, blah, 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 and working on a lathe or whatever. So, yeah. Makes it kind of fun. So it's fun to find little elements like that.
Yes. And he is extremely talented in those things.
He is.
It matched the creativity with the talent, and it's an amazing outcome.
Yep.
Yes. So I've got a quote here that you've spent most of your life slipping in and out of character.
Okay.
Which is, in part, what I love about voiceover, performing and presenting. What message do you need to convey? Let me do the talking.
Oh, right. Yes.
And I love that, your website.
Yep.
Let me do the talking. So how have these experiences and hobbies influenced and inspired your work?
Gosh, I think I'm nonlinear, and that's not something that I really embraced until recent years. I felt more scattered and not organized and all over the place. And it was, I actually was listening to your interview with Jim Coffin, which was fabulous. And I think I may listen to more than once. And he was talking about the Greeks and them being very much, what is it? Masters of, jacks of all trades.
Jacks of all trade.
That kind of thing. So I've always kind of been in that area. And I worked in hospitality for years and have been in get tired of being in hospitality. It gets a little tiring, as folks in hospitality know, and have been working in technology as the non-technology person for a few years. And I was talking with one of my bosses in the lobby at work just a handful of years ago. And she was the one that did finances. And so she's super linear kind of person. And I was talking about kind of being all over the place. And she said, well, you're nonlinear. It was okay. And this role that they created for me, at first I did light bookkeeping and reception work for them. And I'd been a manager in hospitality for a long time. And they'd asked her in the interview, how are you going to feel about not being in charge? And I'm like, I need to not be in charge. I was in charge and I spent too many hours working and not playing and not living. And so I had kind of gone through a big life change around the age of 42 And I needed my nights and my weekends and holidays to not be interrupted. No calls at 2 a.m., no working on holidays, that kind of thing. So all that kind of wraps back around to the fact that I did this work for them that I could let go of at 5 o'clock and walk away. And then I was service coordinator for a while, which is a little more stressful, but I could still walk away at 5 o'clock. And then they created this role, business support specialist. And when they created it, I said, really? BS specialist? That's what you're going to give me. All right, let's go with this. But it was really the kind of jack of all trades thing. So it was a lot of things they didn't want to do and some things that were in my wheelhouse. So I'll do admin things. I go to trade shows. I do the networking. I was allowed to kind of sort out doing outreach in the communities we serve. We serve communities from Kennebunkport to Rockland to Waterville to Mexico, Maine. And for a while, that was serving on boards and committees. I still serve on committees, but less so on boards. Just find out kind of where my fit is a little bit better. And I organize breakfast for the staff, and I created the podcast when we did that for a while. I write the blog now, but I hang the Christmas lights also, and I pick up, I order the office supplies. So it's all over the place. And especially when I was doing the outreach pieces, it was the first time, I was close to 50 at that point, where I was like, oh, someone will pay me to be me, to use my innate gifts and talents or tendencies or whatever. So this job works really well for me. I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I think I'll get back around to it.
That's where we want to go. Yes.
But I can be kind of all over the place, and I can absolutely, despite the way you made my schedule sound, I absolutely find my moments of sloth. Absolutely. And I need to create or use tools to help me stay organized or be organized. And I kind of change that up every few years. So, but here it comes back to the question. The slipping in and out of character piece. So it's helpful because I have to be or do a lot of different things. So I just need to be sort of prepared for that. But I do, the slipping in and out is even more now than I think that it used to be, because I do mystery dinner theater, or I'll MC a show. I'll MC I'll MC events for nonprofits that I work with. And it's, that stuff is natural to me. And I feel like, I'm just, people thank me. I'm like, I'm just doing this thing that's, I'm just standing up there talking, and they're like, yeah, but that would petrify me. Like for some people, that's not natural. So embracing the nonlinear. And that's kind of where my podcast came from. The current podcast, I had one called The Stage Door Diva that I did for a while, and another one that was a short-lived one about women. That's a long story. But in the spring, and I was still kind of coming out of COVID, whatever that is, for all the multiple times that we've come out of COVID, I was really having a existential crisis and talking to my therapist, and I didn't know what to do, because I was at this point in my life where I could do something, but I also knew I could do nothing. Like, that's a choice. Just do nothing. Hang out on the dock at camp, curl up on my couch and play games on my phone. I mean, that was also an option. So even though people would consider me extroverted, it was really hard for me to step back out, and also to wonder what was next. What did I still have time for in my life? When I ran away from home at 42, another story, different podcast. I felt like I'd wasted a lot of my life. And I think, again, Jim Coffin talking about the 27,000 days or whatever. And I'm thinking, well, Jim Coffin's 74, so he's 19 years older than me. And I'm like, wow, I can get a lot more days in between now and when I'm Jim Coffin. I have to do a lot of reading to catch up. It's going to have to be audiobooks. I'm pretty sure. I can't believe he has me motivate almost to listen to read Moby Dick again.
Me too.
I don't think I'll go all the way to War and Peace. I might need a cliff note on the War and Peace, or maybe the audiobook.
And Jim Coffin, by the way, I was at wrestling practice with the other day. He wrestles with the middle school kids.
Oh my gosh!
Throughout the season, And not only is he wrestling with them, he is inspiring, encouraging, and carrying them to the hopefully a next level in their life.
That was amazing, really, to listen to, because having gone to the same high school where he coached a few years after you, he was just this super quiet dude, tough-looking dude that walked through the halls, had a super deep voice.
Blonde with a blonde mustache.
With a blonde mustache, yeah.
Who is this guy?
Yeah.
And when I first met him, it was he's dressed like that, longer hair, wearing a pea coat.
Yeah.
And I'm 15 years old, maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at him and who is this guy?
Right.
What does he have?
Right. Yeah. And you were saying like one of your goals, your first goal is just to get on the team.
Yeah.
And for folks who were not involved with wrestling, I had friends that were wrestling, but you all disappeared into that room. I didn't know what went on in there, but we knew it was smelly, so we stayed away from it.
Yes, it was.
Or we see you guys running around the pit with your garbage bags on or whatever was going on, spitting into cans.
Yes.
So to learn that there was so much behind him, and that's something too. I think I probably left a tangent out there somewhere what I was talking about,
and tangent is the name of your podcast.
Yes, the name of the podcast, right? Yes. That did bring it back around. So I was thinking about I had these other podcasts I didn't bring back. I'm like, I should be working on those podcasts, but during COVID, theater people didn't want to talk about it. There was no theater. It was very sad. I started to interview people to ask what they'd done during that time to be creative, and I do have some of that content, but it wasn't really catching me. And I was in this do nothing, do something, and I'm not gonna cure worldwide famine. I'm not gonna cure cancer or anything in this time that I have left. So it occurred to me that I'm pretty good at talking to people.
You're very good at talking to people.
As are you. And so I could interview people who were making a difference, and had been making a difference, and have kind of more of a niche area that's their area of expertise. So that's what I try to do on the podcast.
Great. So 2 thoughts on that.
Yeah.
One is I would love to carry, what would you say to your 22-year-old self that you figured out at 50? Because same for me, it took me so long to step out of what I thought had to be my strengths.
Yeah.
Not that they were, but what had to be my strengths in order to be successful in the perception that I had created for myself. And when I figured it out, from the help of the people that I work with, my family, Benjamin, Laurie, Jamie, Juliet, Tyler.
And all the fabulous
Kaylee.
Keller Williams personality testing.
All the fabulous. Yeah, exactly right. So what would you now say to that person?
It's interesting you say 50, because what I had, my epiphany at 50, I think you're a little more mild-mannered than I am, I would say. So my thing at 50 was very much, I threw up double birds to the world.
Oh.
Like, I was like, and I told people that approached 50 with trepidation, I was like, I don't know what to tell you, but at 50, I was like, I don't care what anyone else thinks. And I don't mean that in a hurting people way, but I'd cared for too long. And I'd been in an abusive and controlling relationship for 20, 25 years. So I felt that those years I'd lost a lot of time, a lot of those 27,000 days that Jim talked about. So I really struggled, and I made a lot of changes at 42, and I had collected what I called living moments, and I tried to go to concerts more, get out on the water, learn to kayak, things that I actually was not allowed to do in the past. I got back to theater. And so there was a lot of growing during that time, but also, and a lot of figuring who I am, a lot of going back and trying to touch base with who I was at 17. And because Facebook, I was reconnecting with people, including yourself and your brother,
yes,
who I've now been with for 12 years or so. But some of them would say, "Oh, I remember this or that about you," and I wasn't who they expected to find, and I was bummed because I kind of loved who they expected to find, and I think the core and the spirit of me was there, but it wasn't allowed to flourish. So that was a lot of but I still worried about what people were thinking. And I mean, it comes and goes, certainly. But at 50, for some reason, I was like, all right, whatever. And so I try to go back now and tell people much younger, I'm like, please get that epiphany at 30. I mean, you still want to be part of your community and help and serve your community. But as far as worrying about who you are fitting some mold someone else wants for you, don't do it.
Yeah.
So that's that piece of it. But the other piece of learning your strengths and your talents and embracing all of that. And this is something that actually ties into a story that I tell during this presentation that I've done. And the presentation is about looking at your network of people. And as a I used to facilitate a group on Facebook of women over 40 when it was one of my ran away from home things where I created this group of women that I knew personally or a friend of friend. That's as far out as I allowed it to go. And for years I nurtured it. We would ask questions. What are keys to great relationships? What is this and that? And even when it kind of laid quiet, occasionally someone who'd never involved themselves in a thread would hop on and say, I have this thing going on. There's infidelity in my marriage, or my husband has an illness, or there's abuse and I feel like I need to leave. I'm having this issue with raising my children and dealing with their grandparents. Whatever it was super heavy stuff, but it was stuff that they weren't really comfortable talking to their friends and their own family about because it was too close. And they certainly weren't going to throw it out on Facebook. I mean, I'm a big believer in crowdsourcing when you're looking for miscellaneous things. But when it comes to big stuff like this, sometimes it's easier to go to strangers. And people would do that. And I considered that, I referred to it as our deep well of experience and knowledge that was in this particular group of women. But everybody has this. They all have the deep well. So in this talk that I do about that, I get to a section where I show this word cloud. Have you ever done a word cloud?
I don't think I have.
You would love it. You should.
Yeah, I'd like word cloud.
So I took a class. It was a marketing class, I think, years ago. And people listening to this are nodding their head because this is homework you get asked to do sometimes. But I had to go to several people and ask them to give like 10 positive adjectives. It's hard. It's uncomfortable. You don't want to ask this. So, and I tell people, when I speak, I'm like, tell them it's my fault. Like, tell them it's homework you had to do for a workshop you took. And it's okay. Just go ahead and ask for it. I had a friend who said she was afraid to hear find out what she would hear. And I'm like, well, you're only asking for positives.
So you would come to me and say, Rick, tell me 10 positive things about you.
Positive adjectives about me.
Okay.
And then you feed them into this thing. I don't know. I think it's wordcloud.com or something. You go look for it. And it creates these things where you'll see these bold pictures with a whole bunch of words in different angles. And some of the words are larger than others. And that's because you put the word in for as many times as someone said it to you. So I might get, extrovert, gregarious, actress, or something like that in different sizes. And then a lot of subwords. And then teeny tiny words that only come up once. So when I did this exercise, your sister Holly said, organizer. I've always remembered this as organized, but I went to look for it recently and it was actually organizer. And I remember at the time kind of chuckling and feeling a little bit bad that Holly didn't know me well enough to think that was an appropriate word for me, that I wished I was organized or an organizer. But it along with a lot of other words, we have these words that we don't consider part of ourselves. And that's the story that we continue. We're not this, or we're not that. I'm not good at this, or I don't tend toward that. But I stopped and thought, and Holly's experience with me at that time especially was that I had organized a parade. And I had spreadsheets and things were color coordinated, and I had clipboards to give to the volunteers. Like, I was able to organize, and I do that with parties and other events or projects, or trying to organize myself, at work, my nonlinear self. And I was able to go, oh, I see. I can be that person. I am that person. And it's changed how I move in the world. It's changed what I will take on at work, or take on for a nonprofit that I work with, or do for myself personally. You would not walk into my house and find me a super organized person, but I know that I can be organized. So I really encourage people to think outside the box, overused, but to not limit themselves to what they think have been their limitations. So again, this is a thing where learn it at 30 instead of at 50 if you can. So,
well, it's interesting because I think in a lot of ways our personalities are similar, and that for people like us to let go of what other people think is a huge step. I know for me that continues to be a struggle to some extent. I mentioned before, one of my greatest challenges is my need, which most people have, to look good and be right. And when that facade cracks, sometimes it's challenging to deal with that.
Right.
Yeah. So when did you find your voice, we'll say, and how the voiceover, and when did that all kind of come into play?
So when I lived in Texas in my 20s, and I actually took a class in Austin, Texas on voiceover. It was a 6-week workshop or something. And back then you really needed to go to studios to do voiceover. There weren't home studios.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, as I say, every Tom, Dick, and Harry,
Right.
kind of situation. But Austin happened to have studios. In some ways you need to be on the East Coast or the West Coast or one of the big cities to kind of do it. And so I took this class, but then we moved not long after that, and it kind of went by the wayside. But when my employers were doing ads, I worked at an inn, they'd do an ad for the radio or television. I would offer to voice it. I would voice it. I did the community calendar for, I'm forgetting the radio station that used to be for Positive.
89.3.
Yeah. Wow.
WMSJ.
Yes. Back in the day. So
that's right.
I would do some of these things that were not for pay or anything. And then when I was in my 40s doing this, reconnecting, going back to 17, blah, 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 I had a lot of friends that were going back to college. And I was like, I don't want to, I can't think, nonlinear, I can't think of one thing that I would want to go back to college and create that debt for as one thing, one piece of the puzzle, or one thing that I would want to throw all my eggs into that basket. Metaphor, analogy person, all over the place. Mixed metaphors lots of the times.
Love it. Yes.
So I thought, but I would invest in myself for this thing that and this is a pattern. I think it'll be recognizable to people. I did it. I thought I would get back to it, from the 20s. And then I thought I'd missed it. And then every Tom, Dick, and Harry could do it. So why me? Why do it? So finally I hit this point in my 40s where I was like, well, why not me? So I took some classes with a studio in New York, just remote. There were a ton of different things, remote classes, and we had a couple of demos made and created a website. I am not good about taking the time to put myself out there and market for it. I would love to do more, maybe it's not something that I would go after full time. I do have a lot of friends that do it full time, and but I would love to have 3 to 5 projects a month, that kind of thing. If you hear something on an ad for Main Street Bath, that's just something I do as a residual to the fact that I used to be a board member, and it's something that I can offer to them. That's not something I do for pay. I have done things for Maine Public. I've done a lot of e-learning for a company out of the Carolinas, a lot of e-learning on teaching accountants to be auditors. And I can tell you,
that's a little linear.
Financial person is never going to be one of the things in my word cloud. So that's been fun. And I have my newest client is dictionary.com. So you can actually go on dictionary.com, and right now 400, I've just done another 400. So I'll soon have 800 words on there. That's me when you push the little button to see what it sounds like.
Very cool.
Yeah.
How did that come about?
A friend that I'd met in the earlier days of getting educated, and we had a workout group that meant people all over the country and one in Canada that met once a week to practice on scripts and critique each other. And he's a full-time professional in Nevada, and he'd been doing it for a few years. And I don't know if he got into it through an agent or a recommendation. Sometimes somebody will throw it on Facebook. Somebody's looking for this, you audition, you get it, whatever. And there, with e-learning and with this type of job, there are frequently male and female counterparts to it. So there's some variety. And the female counterpart went and became a paralegal. So they needed a new one, and they asked Zippy, his name is, they asked Zippy if he had a recommendation, and he recommended me, and I auditioned for it and do it. So it's kind of fun.
Yes.
The only words I can think of right now are wussy and verklempt.
Verklempt. Add that to my vocabulary.
Verklempt. Oh, emotional in a way that you can't speak. I have seen you verklempt. You have a tendency to verklempt.
Did you say emotion is part of that?
Yeah.
Oh, I am verklempt. How do you pronounce it again?
Verklempt.
Verklempt. That's me.
Okay.
If somebody was going to describe me, they might even, if they had that in the vocabulary, use that as one of my 10 words.
I think there might be a picture. It's my voice in your picture.
That's right.
Verklempt.
Yes. I think that actually on Monday at our family meeting that we had, I was verklempt. I was speechless as well. I think that's part of it.
It is, yes, emotional and speechless because of it.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I sort of digress, but that's been the voiceover journey. I'd love to do more. If you call Dirigo Federal Credit Union in Maine or Kennebec Savings Bank, that's my voice that answers the phone for you. So it's kind of a fun thing. So I'd love to do more. Anyone out there wants to hire me?
That's right.
But
yeah, well, you have a terrific voice.
Thank you.
And it's interesting because so many times I'll hear things and that's her,
Yeah.
So yes, it's very profound.
Sometimes somebody will say, "Oh, that's you," and I'm like, "Yeah, I talk much more clearly when I'm being paid." And my muttering and whatever. So,
how has theater? Was there an H at the end of that word? Perhaps theater. How has that played in with your, finding your voice and helping expand your horizons, I guess?
It's interesting a lot with our families, and this community goes back to high school.
Mm-hmm.
So Jim Coffin was your and your brother and I especially, and you as well, worked with the Montgomerys, so that what we consider the golden age of theater. And I know there are a lot of people since then there's been some golden ages,
yes,
but we consider the golden age of theater in the late 70s through the 80s into the early 90s with the Montgomerys. So, theater. Actually, and this has just kind of come back to me, it was the first time that I found something I felt like I was good at. I mean, I'd played basketball and I'd done some stuff, but theater was the first time I really kind of felt a little bit in the zone. And then it was a special time. It was people coming together and working on a project, bringing all these different pieces to the project, the actors and the directors and the stage hands, the folks building the sets. Now, if you look at larger picture, costume designers, props mistress, whatever. So it's a really good example of a microcosm of a community.
Yes.
And so that is something that you certainly carry forward. You can see all the pieces of the puzzle. I used to taught children's theater camp for a while, and there were some things that we did that they were creating theater out of trash. Actually, it was someone else's creation, but it wasn't trash. Miscellaneous thing, cardboard, pieces of twine or string or whatever. And they would create little sets and create their little actors, and then take flashlights and we put color things on them and they point them. But they'd create this little world. So I think that for any of us theater kids, there's a piece of that we were given as to how people work together as a team. But certainly being the sort of gregarious, outgoing, different personalities has also helped me be out there, people think of me when they need something of that type. So that's helpful. But also, it's also always helped me to blend into different sub communities, different groups of people, to not stand out too much and kind of, and maybe my speech is it's not like putting on, but it's wanting to be being a part of, but also not making the other people feel not a part of, sort of thing. So it's a little bit chameleon-like in that way, to be able to feel comfortable in different situations.
Chameleon. in the context that it's natural for that color to change, so it's not something that you're putting on. It's very how do I say it? It's genuine.
It's genuine. Yeah. It
it's
helps.
genuine.
It helps me to connect. And even in high school, like I didn't have cliques, and I felt very sort of outside in a lot of ways. But I found out that your brother's a couple years younger. He pretends he's a lot younger, but I tell him like I was twice your age in 72, but now
not so
I'm
much.
only 2 years older. But I would talk to some of his folks that were in his class, and they talked about how they saw me as the lead in the spring play, on the varsity basketball team, whatever, as having my shit together, and I knew I was totally messed up inside, super insecure. And so understanding that perspective has been interesting. And asking other friends what they remember from that time period and realizing how different it was from what I was necessarily feeling at the time. But I could hang out with the jocks a little bit. I could hang out with the smart people, but I wasn't one of the super smart people. And the theater people a little bit with the loners. I wasn't out front smoking necessarily, but I was good at connecting with people. And I think maybe the theater piece helped a little bit with that. I've never really connected those two until now.
Well, the theater is that, I never thought about that either, but it is the ultimate in the crossover, I think, of all different types of people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in high school especially
in high school,
you notice that because bless Mrs. M, she would bring those football players in and get them to do stuff. Get them to show up for one thing, but get them to do stuff.
Well, I think about her senior play for my year. I ended up, it was a musical.
Yeah.
I am not musical. And at the same time, I don't think she intended this, but it challenged me. I was not going to miss out on the opportunity to be in my senior play, which happened to be Godspell, that I was very excited about.
Yep.
So I remember sitting there with most of the people that had done their auditions, and I was sitting there, and Mrs. Underwood, the pianist,
yes,
for the performance, who was giving everybody their opportunity, said, "Rick, do you want to try something?" I may have gone up, I don't remember. And I sat there with her, and she said, "Well, what do you want to sing?" I said, "I have no idea." She said, "What kind of music do you like?" At that time, I was listening to a lot of Bruce Springsteen, so I start belting out a Bruce Springsteen song. I'm sure it was terrible. I got a part, it wasn't a great part, but I was in a musical that I never would have been in before.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And I ended up singing to my wife at our wedding.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Not sure that it was.
Do we have that on tape?
We have it on video.
All right. I think that needs to go up on the YouTube channel. Benjamin, that little aside for you.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe that's not available.
If it is, we're going to find it, people.
We're going to find it. Yes. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's part of it.
Yeah. So, public speaking.
Yeah.
You do that. And you also do one-on-one coaching for people with public speaking. So how do you help someone who, like you mentioned earlier, they see you as so natural up there, and for them, they could never do that.
Right. It's there's a little bit of a cross section of people. And, when I'm doing a podcast, my own podcast, especially, I stutter a lot. So sometimes I'll think people are going to listen to me. Why would I talk to her? So I think I wish there was another word for it, because it's kind of confidence coaching as well in a way. But a good example of the cross section of folks that I love to help is I was teaching an adult ed class, and there were a smattering of people, but 3 that I kind of take as examples. One of them was in a new position and was in her job and was going to be going to a convention and speaking in front of several hundred people. And she could do fine in a smaller room, but she wanted to be ready for this type of thing. So I have someone just read for a little bit and anything, and we'll watch them. I'll watch for repetitive body motions that they make that we might want to get a little bit under control so that it's not distracting. Work on them if they need to slow down their pace and prepare that way. So there's that type of person that's and I've worked with people who are preparing for one particular speech, and that's what we worked on. At first I do some general stuff, and then I would work on them. Like in this section, it's a good time to pause and look up and make eye contact, or that kind of thing. There was another person who was in a new role in a new company, and she was now in management and was going to be leading some meetings, and she wanted to be more confident. Super soft-spoken person, wanted to be more confident in those meetings and kind of running meetings and working with her staff. And then the third person, super timid, very quiet, and was afraid is probably the wrong word, but couldn't bring herself to talk in just staff meetings, to speak and to be confident in it. With, you've got strong personalities in the room, and you might just like, I'm just not going to talk. So she needed to be helped to feel confident in her speaking and have the confidence to speak up and advocate for her work and advocate for herself. So it's very different areas. It doesn't have to be, public speaking doesn't have to be about talking to a big room. It could just be, and also it spreads out into networking. I have a lot of tips that I work with people on and in workshops on how to not work a room, but how to walk into a room. I mean, as people-y as I am, I sometimes sit outside a chamber event and have trouble getting myself to go in because I'm just not feeling like peopling.
Sure.
So I go and I give myself an assignment, and I tell people, I'm like, you need to meet 3 new people tonight, or 5 new people. But I also will walk up to 3 people that I don't know who are talking to each other and say, hey, I have an assignment that I've given myself to meet 3 new people, and you are it. Congratulations.
Yeah.
And they laugh, and we get into it. We get into a conversation. Anyway, so things like that to make people feel comfortable. I also pick pods. Like I create what I call safety pods at networking events. So those people are now a safety pod. And I walk into a room, because I go to chamber events all over our community, Kennebec Valley, Penn Bay, wherever. And there'll be some people that I know, and I will walk to that person and let them introduce me to the person that they're with. And they're a safety pod. And I tell them they're a safety pod. And then I'm like, I'm going to go find another pod, or there's a pod over there. There's somebody I know over there. So I'll go over there. So it's like I'm traveling from safe island to safe island to safe island. And I have people have met me at conferences and be like, hey, it's so-and-so. Remember, I'm one of your pod people. Yeah. So that seems like a digression, but it's really not, because it's public speaking. I feel like it's limiting, and I wish I could come up with another phrase. Yeah. Confidence coaching. I think
confidence coaching is great. Yeah. That sounds more like what you're doing, because in all of those areas, it all comes down to the confidence to be able to step into that arena, whatever it happens to be, even if it is just a staff meeting, or if it's just having a conversation with someone that they're uncomfortable about.
Right.
Yeah. I'm really interested and would love to have you coach me on. So when I go to a social event, I walk in and I want to engage with as many people as I can.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because, how do I say it? I just want to spend time with everybody.
Yep.
It's not because I have to know everybody and I have to have them, want to.
No, but you're a connection person.
Yeah, I am a connection person.
So you want to connect and meet people.
I do. So
what's the problem?
And I also want a deep connection.
Well, yes.
Okay.
And there's only so much time.
And my struggle is to be with someone, and I mean, I would spend the whole time talking with one person and be completely fulfilled in that situation. And I'm not sure I'm going to change that much from it, but I also know that the person I might be with maybe wants to talk to some other people too.
Right. Well, that's
any advice?
It's hard. That is a little bit hard to tell. And I think, and this goes back to being the insecure one a little bit, I will extract myself before I might get to that point. Like sometimes I just kind of go on and ramble. So I'm going to think about that and think if there's a best way. I think I will say, and have recently, well, I don't want to keep you from connecting with other people. And that person may say, oh, I'm enjoying this. And then you can kind of settle into it. But if you give them a little bit of an out, then you might get a better sense of it from that. It reminds me also something I would love to touch on, I keep going back to this one presentation I've done recently, but it really was the culmination of something I've been thinking about doing for years. I had done several presentations for the women's luncheons in Augusta and on different topics. So tech tips for the non-techies, or mobile apps for pros on the go. And then they asked me to do one on side hustles once because they knew about the voiceover and the other stuff, and that wasn't my day job. And so I did that. And after that, I was joking with their staff and saying, next time, let's just do a choose your own adventure. Like next time I'm just going to show up. We're going to let people ask questions. We'll see if I know the answer, or see if I can answer it. Or maybe there's this spinning wheel that has 20 topics that I might be able to talk on. We'll spin it. They ask a question. And the reason I felt confident that I could pull that off was because I wasn't alone in the room. If I didn't know it, there was probably someone else in the room. And then that really evolved into the presentation that I do now, which goes back to the well. And helping people to not underestimate the depth of that well. So we go and we skim the surface sometimes at networking events, and we talk about our work that we're doing and nonprofit work that we may be involved with, and our family a little bit, and show pictures of our dogs. You know, that's kind of top-ish level to going to a little bit to second level. But I put out a questionnaire before the event, and I asked people to fill out these things. Up to 5 things that people know you for, that they may come to you for. Could you, Rick, tell me 5 things that people might come to you for?
They might come to me for they're experiencing a challenge, and they might like to have me listen to their challenge, and then they might like some advice from me. They might come to me, obviously, if they wanted to buy or sell real estate.
Right.
They might come to me if they wanted to talk about parenting.
Yep.
They might come and talk to me about my spiritual life.
Yep. Yeah. Perfect.
Is that 5?
That's enough.
Okay.
It's up to 5. So it might have been 5. So then what are a couple of things that people may not think about you? Maybe your smaller circle or closer circle knows this, but people may not necessarily think about you for, but you actually could talk about and would talk about some experience that you have that isn't something you put out there a lot. If anything comes to mind.
Yeah, I think they might not know that I too do like my little quiet time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I how much I enjoy time with Lori and being alone.
Yep.
That I don't always need to be fed by other people. You know, I think people probably know the family time is super important to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I see those two kind of tiers, and the top tier is what we're comfortable with. The next tier, some examples that I give is there may be someone in the top tier, they are home health care for senior people. That's what they do for a living. But my second tier thing might be having had a dad with Parkinson's and helping him through that same thing. But I'm doing it from a personal level. So it's my second tier. I'm happy to talk about it. It doesn't happen to be one of the 5 things people might know me for, like the things you listed at the top, you know, or I say there might be people that are great with Excel spreadsheets or something. So those are...
They're not going to know me for that.
So those are their things, or maybe they're a baker in their spare time. And that's not one of the top 5 things, but people go a little bit deeper and find out what that other thing is, but also feel comfortable talking about that thing, even if you don't feel like, well, I don't really have enough experience. You have experience, and you have your experience, and lots of times people need to hear things 20 times from 20 different people, or from those same people over and over before it really sinks in. So don't underestimate telling that piece of your own story. The third level, I ask them to tell me a topic that they have experience in, but they don't talk about. They keep that door shut. It's painful for some reason. These are anonymous, so I'm just asking them to write that down. And then I ask them to think about sharing that. And I don't go too far into it, because people right at that moment, they know what that topic is for them. And it's really about them knowing what that topic is for them. An example for me is the abusive relationship that I was in. I was not comfortable talking about that for years. I wouldn't talk about that for years. And some of that was not wanting to kick a bear situation.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people who have different reasons for it. And some of it maybe it's just there's so many different, they may have had their own experience with medical scare or something that just brings up too much for them, or they lost someone it brings up too much for them. But there is such a blessing and such value to both to share that with other people. It helps you. So like now I'm in a place where I'm starting to share about that story. But also don't underestimate letting someone else share with you. Like, so I want people to see the well. The well is there for them. They're also part of the well for other people, and not to underestimate the power of sharing their story, as small as they think it is in their experience and as tough as they think it might be, but also in allowing someone else to share their expertise with them.
So very good. Yes.
Yeah. It's a good exercise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And part of it reminded me too came from the women's group, where someone would come in and ask a question that they wouldn't ask of other people in the same questionnaire. I'm like, what's a question that you would like? What's a light, fluffy question? Because I need to give them a little breather, take the roller coaster up a little bit, as I like to say.
Yeah.
And then what's a question that you love an answer to, but it's difficult even for you to ask the question.
Sort of allowing them to become more and more vulnerable.
Yeah.
Down in the depths. And I mentioned this a while ago. I haven't read the book yet, but it's by Humble the Poet.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I don't even remember the exact name of the book, but it's about love and being loved, I think. And he talks about the importance of vulnerability. And if we could all have 2 quick stories that maybe it's the well and it's the 2 top levels that introduce vulnerability to somebody who you have just met, how engaged you can come with somebody.
Yes.
And how that can be enriched so quickly, as opposed to, sort of sparring back and forth between, I might tell you this, or who are you, and those kind of things.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to. Do you guys have show notes? You have show notes. You have like broken down, super fancy, like broken down like timestamps. Super impressive.
So I'd
love to hear about that book in the show notes.
Yes, that would be great to have in the show notes. And I will tell you that all credit goes to Benjamin and Juliet for doing all of that, because they figured out before I did where my talents was.
Yes.
My talents are, and they run with the rest of it.
That's awesome.
I am the luckiest man in the world.
You are.
Yes, I am.
Very lucky man.
Yeah.
There is no doubt about that.
Yes.
I was wondering, did Jim Coffin have notes in front of him, or did he riff on all that?
I have never met with Jim Coffin before without notes.
Okay. But he had notes in front of him?
He had notes.
Okay.
Yes, he had prepared.
Good.
He has always done that.
I was like, is he knowing all of these quotes off the top of his head?
However, he would know those. Oh, the quotes he would know off the top of his head.
That's amazing.
Yeah, primarily. And he had in his mind how he would present what he had done, was written down things that he didn't want to forget.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Yes, which is good preparation.
Right.
Yeah. And so I got a question here from someone. You've talked a bit about moving from project to project and reinventing yourself. How do you think about being a dynamic individual and moving through the different phases of one's life?
Wow. I like that.
Yeah.
Thanks to our listener, who might also be the producer and sound guy.
And great question, Benjamin.
You know what? As soon as I heard dynamic, I thought, wow, that's going to be my new word.
You are dynamic, by the way.
Well, that's interesting.
You should take great confidence in the fact that if you were going to ask me for the words to describe you, dynamic would be right in that list.
I appreciate that. But I do love it, because nonlinear is great, but it's all over the place. But it's also dynamic, nonlinear, and it's dynamic.
You got the question? You want me to read it again?
Yes, read it again.
Okay, read it again. You've talked a bit about moving from project to project and reinventing yourself, which you have done. Yeah. How do you think about being a dynamic individual and moving through the different phases of one's life?
It's interesting, because as I think about people that are listening, there are different levels of dynamic. I'm the scattered all over the place dynamic, and that works for me. And I think I'm keeping a harkening. I just listened to Jim's thing yesterday and today, so that's in my head. But about just having and the living moments that I collected when I first ran away. And that might be going to a concert, or it might be just getting a Happy Meal at McDonald's instead with the toy instead of, or I collect colors and sunsets and sunrises. So these, collecting these little moments, being ready and prepared to spontaneously go in whatever direction. Now, your brother and I are both don't have children. Didn't have children from our previous relationships. Don't have children. So we have the ability to be a little more immature because no one's depending on us in that way.
That's not immature. That's just, let's use the word spontaneous.
Okay, spontaneous. That's fine.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying we don't necessarily have responsibilities that, yeah. So the second thing I thought of when you read that was, there are some people that are fairly linear, or they have one area that's their life, and maybe it's their focus. They have one thing that is their passion, or they are a master at, and that's fine too, and that's great. And their dynamic moments are inside of that. Like they are seamstress, but they do a costume thing, or they have this great talent for this detailed part of it. There's someone I follow on TikTok that does vintage, back to Victorian era through the 50s costuming and the details, the undergarments, not silly undergarments, but the just the crazy layers that were, and that's taking one passion but being dynamic with it. So I think there's a couple different ways to be dynamic. So I don't want people to feel like they have to be all over the place and to be dynamic, because you can put all your energy, because dynamism is probably not in the dictionary, is about energy. So it's deciding where your energy goes. Oh, I hit the mic. And sometimes that's planned, and sometimes it's random or spontaneous.
Yeah, sometimes it's just personality is dynamic, and how do you bring that?
Right.
And sometimes it is talents. I think about like an orthopedic surgeon who specializes in knee replacement.
Yeah.
And the guy or woman, what do they do? 10, knee operations a week. I don't know how many they do.
Right.
But it's very much the same. And yet there's creativity and dynamic opportunities all around that. Creativity and finding new ways to heal people.
Yeah.
And dynamic in how they deal with their patients and their staff, and motivating people.
Right.
Maybe.
So energy and connection. And so I guess that I move through life, if I'm trying to answer the question at all, in moving in the directions that attract me, that are shiny or colorful or whatever, however I perceive that, and different people are going to perceive it differently, and making those connections. Like you like to make the deeper connections. I like to encourage people to find that deeper level of the well. I have this whole list of words that what the well does. There's nourishment, there's refreshment, there's light, there's just this whole list if you think about that type of thing. But there, when you go deeper, sometimes it's also darker, and that's some of the darker things, that the struggles that we share, and that all of that as well. So they're kind of both pieces of the puzzle. I want to be sure, and I know we're coming toward the end, but I want to be sure also and say, because I don't want someone to listen and go, I'm just not feeling it. I'm frequently not feeling it too. And there are some times that I do have trouble getting out of the car to go into that event, or get off the couch, or get out of bed. I mean, I have dogs that won't allow me to stay in bed, but, and I encourage people to get help from a therapist, or if they have faith, to talk to their clergy or someone. We're talking a lot about connection, and don't hesitate to connect with people, to get help, to get to a place that you want to be. I won't figure out what metaphor to use for that, but I just acknowledge I certainly have down days. I am not always what I present on Facebook, because I don't feel like I need to put my down days out there for people. They're all dealing with their own thing. So I don't happen to be kind of one of those people. And I don't think it's not authentic. The craziness or my food or my eyes or my selfies or my costumes, that's all real and authentic. Once in a while I'll do a post that people will text me and go, "What's wrong? What's going on?" You know, something's a little, I'm like, well, life, you know?
Yes.
So
yeah.
Anyway.
Well, that's really helpful. And for somebody who can't step out, that's very encouraging. And I would say the same thing, you know. Sometimes it isn't that easy.
Right.
And sometimes you just push through, or sometimes you just sit back.
And I don't know where this advice came from, but just what is the next thing? There are plenty of goals and hopes and dreams or whatever that I haven't managed to do or figure out, or that I legit don't have time to do at this point. But there are also tasks that are totally doable that frequently I think people that are in depression or whatever their scenario is, they're like, I can't do this thing. But that thing has 10 steps or 20 or 100 steps to it. Just do the next thing. Or if you're having trouble making a big decision, make a decision and remind yourself it doesn't have to be forever. This is super cliche stuff. This is stuff a lot of people have talked about before. We were talking about vulnerability. Jim talked about Brene Brown. That's another example there. It doesn't hurt to hear the things over and over, because sometimes it's going to take 20 times to click for you, or sometimes you weren't ready to hear it when you first heard it 15 years ago, but you might hear it now. So Benjamin was talking, we were talking some more on a brief break about all the messages that we're bombarded with, and trying to call those out, because that can certainly be, I can absolutely get scrolling, you know, the death scroll and lose time on puppies and horses and TikTok music videos or whatever, you know. And that can be difficult, but there's a Della Reese. Are you familiar with Della Reese? She used to back a ways. Yeah. So, and she was a very, very faith-based woman, and she listened to this talk that she did probably in the 70s or 80s, and she talked about like the words that we put out there going into a water wheel, like to be careful about the words and the thought that we put in the water wheel, because it's going to come out at some point.
And was she talking about the words that we put out into the world, but also into our minds?
Yeah, also into our minds. Yeah. She was also another thing that she talked about was, as far as goals and stuff, she was a single woman. She wanted to be a married woman and a mother. And for many years she was not, but she left a place for her husband in her life and in her bed. Like, she had a double bed, and she was like, I'm leaving this space for my, you know, and she eventually had her person. But it was interesting because when she was envisioning her dreams and things, she made sure to leave space in her life for the things that she wanted. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting.
Yes, amazing. Well, we could talk. And I would love to talk more. I would like to have you tell people how they can get in touch with you, learn more about you.
Sure.
About what you do. So tell us that.
Probably the shortcut is letmedothetalking.com or tamaralilly.com, which will also take you to the same place.
Great website, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's a lot of fun. And it does show that, you know, a lot of nonlinear and a lot of different things going on there. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, it has a link to all of the podcasts, but you can also find the current podcast at tamgents.com. So TAMGENTS. And it's also on Apple. You know, it's on the usual podcatchers, Apple, Google, various places like that. So those are probably the best and easiest ways. You can also email me at vo@tamaralilly.com.
Awesome.
And while you're at it, you should definitely check out btsmaine.com for our Burgess Technology Services.
Yes.
We'll do all the plugs. So yeah, this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great discussion.
Yeah.
Tell Joe
my brother in living, as
my brother in living, as my wife says, my sister in living.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Well, thanks again.
Thank you, Rick and Benjamin.